Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Prabhupada Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajakacharya Ashtotara Shata Shri Srimad His Divine Grace इसी भक्ति वेदांत स्वामी शिल प्रभुपाद की जय नित्य लीला प्रविष्ट ओम विष्णुपाद परमहंस परिव्राजकाचार्य अष्टोत्तर शत श्री श्रीमद His Divine Grace शिल भक्ति सिद्धांत सरस्वती ठाकुर प्रभुपाद की जय अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की जय नामाचार्य श्रील हरिदास ठाकुर की जय प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद की जय श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण गोप गोपीनाथ श्याम कुंड राधा कुंड गिरि गोवर्धन की जय श्री वृंदावन मथुरा धाम की जय श्री मायापुर नवदीप धाम की जय पुरुषोत्तम क्षेत्र श्री जगन्नाथपुरी धाम की जय ISKCON शिकागो न्यू सेवक कुंज धाम की जय देयर मोस्ट मर्सीफुल लॉर्डशिप श्री श्री किशोर किशोरी की जय श्री श्री जगन्नाथ बलदेव सुभद्रा महारानी की जय श्री श्री गौर निताय की जय गंगा माई यमुना माई की जय भक्ति देवी तुलसी महारानी की जय श्री हरिनाम संकीर्तन यज्ञ की जय हरे कृष्ण महामंत्र की जय निताय गौर प्रेमानंदे all glories to the assembled devotees all glories to the assembled devotees all glories to Sri Sri Guru and Gauranga
Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Raja Janarandana Yashodanandana Raja Janarandana Yamunatiravanachari Yamunatiravanachari Reading from the 6th canto, chapter 18. We're reading from the 6th canto, chapter 18, text 38 through 40. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Jnana-timirandasya Gyananjana-shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Tadati Svapadantikam Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Eva Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Nisham Yatadvacho Vipro Vimana Paryatapyata Aho Adharma Sumahan Nadya Me Samupastitaha Nisham Yatadvacho Vipro Vimana Paryatapyata Aho Adharma Sumahan Adya me samupastitaha Nisham yatadvacho vipro Aho adharma sumahan Adya me samupastitaha Nisham yatadvacho vipro Manapayatapyata Aho adharma sumahan Adya me samupastitaha Nisham yatadvacho vipro Vimanapayatapyata Aho adharma sumahan Adyame samapastitaha Nisham yatad vajo vipro Vimana paryatapyata Aho adharma samahan Adyame samapastitaha Shamya hearing Tat vachaha her words Vipraha the Brahmana Vimanaha aggrieved Paryatapyata lamented Aho alas Adharmaha impiety Sumahan very great Adya today me upon me Samupastitaha has come. Translation upon hearing Diti's request Kashyapa Muni was very much aggrieved. Alas, he lamented, now I face the danger of the impious act of killing Indra. Purport, although Kashyapa Muni was eager to fulfill the desire of his wife Diti, when he heard that she wanted a son to kill Indra, his jubilation was immediately reduced to nothing, because he was averse to the idea. Text 39. Aho artendriyayar namo yoshin mayeha maya krita cheta kripanna patishe narake dhruvam. Translation, Kashyapa Muni thought, alas, I have now become too attached to material enjoyment. Taking advantage of this, my mind has been attracted by the illusory energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead in the form of a woman, my wife. Therefore, I am surely a wretched person who will glide down toward hell. Text 40. Kotikrama nuvartanta svabhavam ihayoshita dinmam pathabudam svarte taraham tvajitendriya. Translation, this woman, my wife, has adopted a means that follows her nature, and therefore she is not to be blamed. But I am a man, therefore all condemnation upon me. I am not at all conversant with what is good for me, since I could not control my senses. Purport, the natural instinct of a woman is to enjoy the material world. She induces her husband to enjoy this world by satisfying his tongue, belly, and genitals, which are called jiva, udara, and upastha. A woman is expert in cooking palatable dishes so that she can easily satisfy her husband in eating. When one eats nicely, his belly is satisfied, and as soon as the belly is satisfied, the genitals become strong. Especially when a man is accustomed to eating meat and drinking wine and similar passionate things, he certainly becomes sexually inclined. It should be understood that sexual inclinations are meant not for spiritual progress, but for gliding down to hell. Thus, Kashyapa Muni considered his situation and lamented. In other words, to be a householder is very risky unless one is trained and the wife is a follower of her husband. A husband should be trained at the very beginning of his life. Komara acharet pragyo dharman bhagavatan iha. During the time of brahmacharya or student life, a brahmachari should be taught to be expert in Bhagavat Dharma, devotional service. Then, when he marries, if his wife is faithful to her husband and follows him in such life, the relationship between husband and wife is very desirable. However, a relationship between husband and wife without spiritual consciousness, but strictly for sense gratification, is not at all good. It is said in Srimad Bhagavatam that especially in this age, Kali Yuga, Dampatye Viruchir Hetu, the relationship between husband and wife will be based on sexual power. Therefore, householder life in this Kali Yuga is very risky. It is said in Srimad Bhagavatam that especially in this age, Kali Yuga, Dampatye Viruchir Hetu, the relationship between husband and wife will be based on sexual power. Therefore, householder life in this Kali Yuga is extremely dangerous unless both the wife and husband take to Krishna consciousness. Okay, so we're continuing the narration of DT trying to please her husband in order to get a son who will kill Kashyapa's other son, Indra. So yesterday we heard about how I believe Nityananda Prabhu, he was narrating the pastime of Kaikeyi and Dasarat, how because Kaikeyi was very pleased Dasarat so much, or because I guess she saved his life or something, so then Dasarat kind of asked or told Kaikeyi that yes, whatever you want, I'll give for you, and then she ended up asking him to do something which he didn't really want to fulfill, but he had to because he already promised her. So similarly, Kashyapa Muni is in a similar situation where now we're responding to his. Kashyapa Muni is thinking about. We're hearing his thoughts about DT's request, which is not so nice for him. I was thinking of another pastime with Savitri. Is that Savitri in the Mahabharata? There's this one lady who she was the daughter of a king, and she was very qualified. So then apparently her father couldn't really find a good husband for her because she was too qualified or something, and she wasn't able to. I don't know. She wasn't satisfied with anybody that was coming to become her potential husband. So then her father said, "Okay, fine, go find your own husband." So he sent her off, and then eventually she came across this one husband who she liked, and then it turns out that particular one that she liked was like cursed or something, so that he could only live 1 year longer. So the only one that she liked was about to die practically as soon as they get married. But nevertheless, she was really attached to this husband, so she said, yes, I'll marry this husband. His name was Satyavan. So anyway, that happened, and then they got married, and then shortly thereafter, Yamaraj came to take away the husband as was ordained. And then so when Yamaraj was coming, the wife, Savitri, she saw Yamaraj, which means she must have been pretty qualified if she can actually see Yamaraj. So Yamaraj was coming, then he took Satyavan, her husband, and then was off to the boat of death. But then Savitri was like, she just started following Yamaraj. And then, which was pretty interesting. Not only could she see Yamaraj, but she could also follow him. So she was quite qualified. So then she kept following him, and then Yamaraj was like, stop following me. But she wouldn't listen, she just kept following him. And then eventually she started speaking the glories and praises of Yamaraj, how wonderful he is and different things. And then, anyway, so then Yamaraj is like, you really got to stop following me. I'll give you whatever you want, just leave me alone. And everything but, and then he's like, I'll give you everything but your husband back, more or less. Like, I'm not going to return your husband, but anything else you want, I'll give you. So then she's like, okay, she asked for 3 boons. First, she asked for her forefather or something to become in a better situation. Okay, done. Then she asked for another boon that her father or something could get like 100 sons. And then Yamaraj said, okay, done. So then she was pretty crafty. So then she came up with another boon, and then she said, okay, I want 100 sons. And then I guess Yamaraj wasn't thinking when he agreed to fulfill this boon, but Yamaraj said, sure, you can have 100 sons. And then DT responded, well, how am I going to have 100 sons if you're taking my husband? So then Yamaraj was like, dang, you got me. Okay, so then he ended up having to give her husband back. So I thought that was a kind of a similar thing, how like the wife might suggest something, or girls might suggest something that might not be, that the other person might not want to fulfill, but they have to. So I guess that's kind of the situation going on here. So the way Kashyapa Muni is responding to this request, he's pretty nice. I mean, he first of all, he's taking the blame himself. He takes full responsibility for whatever happens. He's not really getting angry at his wife, but he is getting. He does comment about the nature of women in general, like in his lamentation. He just talks about what is the nature of women, and that's what we're going to hear about in these next section of verses, is different things about the nature of women. So this isn't the most accepted topic in modern world, especially here in America, about what the Vedas have to say about the nature of women and what they're like. I remember, can you get my phone? It's over there next to my water bottle. Thanks. Anyway, I was just thinking, I have a friend, when I was in high school, I gave my friend a Bhagavad Gita, because I'd read the Bhagavad Gita in high school, and I gave my friend, who I thought would like it, another Bhagavad Gita as a gift. I gave him a Science of Self-Realization and a Bhagavad Gita, and so he read the Bhagavad Gita, and then he said the first 40 pages of the introduction were the 40 most interesting pages I've ever read in my life. So then he kept reading, and then I guess in chapter 1, text 40, the very beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, there's a famous verse and purport, that he particularly pointed out. So he got to this one point, and then he came up to me in the middle of, we were in high school, and he just brought out the Bhagavad Gita right in the middle of class to change and said, hey man, I got a question. And it was particularly about what the Vedas have to say about the nature of women. So it has to do with the verse, when irreligion is prominent in the family, the women of the family become polluted, and from the degradation of womanhood comes unwanted progeny. So my friend was like, okay, the verse is cool, no problem with the verse. So then he's like, but let's look at the purport here. It was really funny how he pointed this out to me. So then he said, okay, first of all he asked me, do you really believe this? And then he said, okay, what's that? More or less that's what it says, is that, yes, as children are very prone to being misled, women are similarly very prone to degradation. And then, according to Chanakya Pandit, women are generally not very intelligent and therefore not trustworthy. So he pointed this out, and I don't think he cared for the Bhagavad Gita or anything with the Vedas after hearing that. So it's really interesting how, we distribute millions of copies of Bhagavad Gita all over the world, and this is like one of the first things that people are reading when they read the Bhagavad Gita. And I don't know, Donna Kelly was commenting how interesting it was that this particular controversial point was put out right in the beginning, and then she was saying it was a point to kind of test one's sincerity, whether you're really serious about Krishna consciousness or not. That is a point like this going to deter you from searching after the absolute truth, or are you just going to focus on this one point and then forget everything else and not try to understand it? So when I was in high school, I didn't really know what to say to this. When I read it, I don't know, I guess I must have not been thinking, or I didn't consider it. I just glossed over it. I just thought, okay, whatever. All this other stuff is really cool, and I don't understand this, but I'll move on. But my friend, he couldn't do that. And a lot of people who read the Bhagavad Gita and other Vedic literatures, when they hear about the nature of women, or what their view is, they just forget the whole thing. I don't believe it. It doesn't make sense. It's this kind of like chauvinistic way of thinking. It's not very broad-minded. It's not within my experience. I don't see women the way they see women. I don't have the same experience that the Vedas say that women are like. So they must be wrong. If they're wrong about this, then I can't trust anything that the Vedas say, and then forget about the whole thing. So, particularly in regard to this, like, intelligent women are less intelligent point. What they do, what some people, even like skeptics, do when they hear this, is that they compare like a woman who's very qualified, like a brahmana like qualified woman, and then they compare her with like a shudra like man, and say, look, this woman here is way more intelligent than this man, so therefore how can you say that women are less intelligent than men? See, this is wrong. But the way the Vedas are, when they talk about women and men and their natures, the comparison is done between people who are in the same kind of varna, in the same kind of social status, same kind of social position. You compare a man and a woman from that category, and then generally you'll see that women are less intelligent than men. Generally. Now, another thing when we talk about the natures of women and men, I sent this one quote to Jeremy and Cody, and then also to Gadadhar, because Gadadhar was having problems also with this women and man nature stuff. And he's just like, it's not within my experience. I just can't relate to this. I can't understand why the Vedas say what they do about the nature of women. So I sent him this one fairly famous quote from Prabhupada, where he kind of discusses what really woman means and what man means. And so he said in one lecture, woman means, for man, the woman is woman. And for woman, the man is woman. Not that woman means a particular class. Woman means which are enjoyable. So in this material world, the man is enjoyable by the woman, and the woman is enjoyable by the man. This body is superfluous. So, and then Gadadhar said, this is by far the most intelligent thing I've ever heard about gender designations I wish I would have learned about this right from the beginning, because then it would have made everything else make so much more sense. So, because the body is superfluous. I mean, I remember a while ago I watched this one documentary. No, it was 60 Minutes. Really cool show I used to watch. Pretty interesting. So they had this one thing on 60 Minutes about this one disorder. It's called gender identity disorder, or it's called gender dysphoria, where one's anatomy at birth is different than how they feel themselves to be internally. So internally they might feel like they're a girl, but they have the body of a boy, or vice versa. And it's pretty interesting. They interviewed all these cases of really, really young kids who just right from birth they're just like, I am not a man, I'm not a boy, I'm definitely a girl, although he looks like a boy, and they just start behaving and acting just like a girl. And there's so many cases like this. And in fact, they showed this one case of these identical twins. Identical twins, same DNA, same upbringing, same everything, and then, but they had two separate rooms. And then you looked at one of the rooms, they're both boys. One of the rooms was just like this, GI Joe, planes, trucks, blue. It was clearly a guy's room. And then you looked at the other room, it was pink, frills, glitter, stars, dolls. It was just a very girl room. And then, they were both boys, but one identified to be that I might have a body of a boy, but I really am like a girl. So what happens when people who have this disorder, if they're treated, like if they're accepted according to what they feel themselves to be internally, they do much better than those who are not accepted for who they are internally, but who are just accepted by what their body looks like. So many people who have this disorder, they have very strong anxiety or depression, or they isolate themselves from society, or they have high suicide rates. But those whose families and friends are very supportive, and then they try to accept them for who they are internally, then they actually do much better. So there's this other verse in the Bhagavatam, in the 7th canto, chapter 11, text 35. At the end of this chapter, the chapter is titled the perfect society, the four talking about the varnas in society, how they're arranged. And the last verse is as follows: if one shows the symptoms of being a Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, or Shudra, as described above, even if he has appeared in a different class, he should be accepted according to those symptoms of classification. So it's interesting that right before this verse comes, there's a whole description, 5 verses, about the roles of women in society and how they are, what their symptoms like, what are their classifications, different things just about women. And then right after that, this verse comes that one should be accepted according to their guna and karma, their qualities and their activities, which kind of supports the results that they found in their studies of people who have this, identity, whatever disorder. They found that those who were accepted according to their qualities, they did much better, and those who were not accepted, they had very severe depression and things like that. So that's another point that can be, I guess, considered when we're talking about these are some just general ideas for when we're dealing with this subject of men and women in general. But I guess talking more about the specific natures of women according to the Vedas, Bhaktivinoda Maharaj, he gives a really nice kind of analysis of the nature of women, the nature of men, the nature of women, kind of what psychologically what they're like. And he, really what makes up the nature of the women is, a large part of it is what their intelligence is like, how their intelligence works. And he found that, because they say that we hear that the intelligence, the mind, intelligence, and ego, they're like the subtle body, and it's kind of grouped around the heart. And then these intelligence, mind, and false ego, at least intelligence and mind, they have to express themselves through this body. So one of the main organs for expressing one's mind and intelligence is the brain. And what scientists have found through their study of the brain, and when they're performing CAT scans and all these things, that they found that there's certain areas of the brain that have different functions. And generally, there's just a general divide. There's 2 halves of the brain, and one half is primarily meant for the more analytical side. It's all the analytical powers. It's very good at reasoning and rational, and it's kind of cold and hard. But that's one side of the brain, and then there's another side of the brain that has to deal with emotions, the heart and feelings, and it's very pleasant and warm, and that's the other side. So what they found when they do these CAT scans of male and female brains is that they find that the male brain, when it's doing something, only one part of the brain is activated, and when it's doing a particular task. But when women they're doing something, their whole brain is active. And they found this. So this finding kind of supports how the Vedas kind of understand how the men's intelligence works and the women's intelligence works, and each way they work have different strengths and weaknesses. So Bhaktivedanta Purnamaraji gives a really nice kind of analysis about the nature of men and women based on this finding. So he says that like for men, for example, generally when they're doing something, they're either fully on the analytical side or they're on the emotional side. And it's very difficult for them to kind of be doing both at the same time. So there's certain advantages of this and certain disadvantages of this. The advantage is that men can be, if they're trained properly, they can be very analytically powerful. They can see things very clearly. They don't have to. They can actually kind of be aloof from a situation and just kind of analyze situations, kind of how they are, and this technique can really make one it makes one's intelligence very strong, at least in particular, like analyzing things. And then because you're not kind of influenced by emotions, so to speak, you're able to kind of, it makes it much easier to be objective. And then when you have very strong intelligence and you can kind of see things the way they are, it helps you to have certain qualities like leadership ability, because you can organize things nicely, you can see things how they are, you can take responsible positions because you know how things are and you're not emotionally invested in certain things as much. And so like I guess in that way it's a benefit, but there's some disadvantages of having this kind of intelligence, because if you do end up going to the emotional side, then you're fully on the emotional side and your intelligence goes out the window. And generally if that happens, then men tend to do really stupid things. Like, I guess the best example is, like when men, like a guy falls in love with a girl and then, he's just madly in love. It's obvious that he's completely on the emotional platform. He's not at all on the analytical platform. And then he just does all these stupid things to try to woo the girl, and because he's on the emotional platform. And generally men who are on the emotional platform, they tend to be, they get very passionate about things, and they tend to really get into sense gratification and this ism or that ism, and that's kind of like what happens, and that's usually not the best for spiritual advancement. So that's kind of like how the men's intelligence kind of works. And then there's the woman's intelligence, how they work, because the woman's intelligence, the analytical side and the emotional side are working simultaneously, always. So because both are going simultaneously, they're able to handle emotional situations much better than men, because one, they can relate to it because their emotions are working and they can feel it, they can understand it, but at the same time their intelligence isn't, their analytical side is not turned off, so they can be able to kind of still think properly and not be carried away by just their emotions, but they can kind of handle both simultaneously. This is one of the reasons why women are generally very good at raising children, because children tend to be on the emotional platform mostly, and women, they can relate to that emotional platform, but at the same time they have their analytical side also working, so they can know what's right and wrong in that situation. Whereas men, first of all, men have a very difficult time just kind of relating to emotions in general. Sometimes, they're generally considered to be cold and hard-hearted, and they could either do, this or that. They can go to work, but provide and all that stuff, but they have a very difficult time doing that and being affectionate and being emotional. Kind of like it's very difficult to balance the two. Whereas women, they have a more of an ability to do other things and at the same time, keep their affectionate side. So another disadvantage, I guess, of having a man's intelligence is that they're generally more skeptical about God's existence. So because they have to understand everything in order to accept anything. So they have to philosophically understand it, and then they'll accept it. Women, on the other hand, this is one of their advantages, is that because they're working more on the emotional side, or everything is working, they're able to take to religion very easily because they're doing it kind of based on their feelings. They feel that Krishna consciousness or some religion it just feels good, so they accept it and they can access that. Prabhupada said that anytime there's a religious function going on, you'll always see more women than men. So this is another example. Of course, I guess this particular religious function, somehow there's more men than women. I don't know how that works. So either we must have some emotional men then. Yeah. But women have this ability though to, one advantage is that because this is why women are also considered to be kind of like a fortress in the Bhagavatam. They're considered to be like a fortress because if the husband gets on the emotional platform, the wife can relate to that emotional platform, but her analytical side doesn't go out the window while the man's does. So the woman can then kind of push the man back onto the analytical side if she's a religious wife, and help her husband kind of go get through this emotional stuff and then back on the analytical side. And so that's how it's like a fortress. It's like a wonderful quality of a woman, how the intelligence of a woman works. And I guess just generally women are more sensitive in general to things. Their emotions are, I don't know, generally if you're more, both the good and the bad, emotions are just generally more, they're more infused with what happens in their life, generally. So the happiness and the joy and tenderness, all this, they're really, when they experience something, it's a lot of times it's from feelings. And ultimately this is kind of more important in spiritual life than just being analytical about things. Because eventually we're supposed to come to a point where emotions is the main part of our spiritual life, where we're doing things based on spiritual emotions. And if you're already in tune with your emotions, when you're hearing the pastimes of Krishna, it's so easy to fall in love with Krishna, because you can just relate so much with all the feelings and everything that Krishna has with his devotees. So in that sense, there's a big advantage having a woman's intelligence. In fact, I heard that one devotee, a senior devotee, was saying that he believed, or she was believing that in ISKCON, women are probably going to be going back to Godhead more so than the men, because they're able to connect with Krishna consciousness on that emotional level, which is ultimately needed to get us out of the material world, is to love Krishna. But these intense emotions and things, that they also have their downside, because this can often lead to like exploitation, which often happens nowadays. Is that women generally are like a target for exploitation. You see that pretty much all the advertisements that are out there now, they're like geared toward like kind of alluring women to get this and that thing, and then all of a sudden, like, you know, their emotions and their feelings goes more towards something material as opposed to something spiritual, and then ultimately that's not really good for their spiritual life. And into the purport too, also because of this, they tend to want to enjoy material things more. You know, we hear that women are 9 times lustier than men. And I guess that's mentioned somewhere. Because 4th canto, yeah. So that's another thing the Bhagavatam says about women. Yeah, so that's what's being said here, is that they have a tendency to enjoy the material world more. So this is another downside of the way their intelligence works. So there's pros and cons, and if one has proper training, according to how the man's intelligence works and the woman's intelligence works, then they can both thrive in their particular, with their particular faculties that they have, and they can both do wonderful advancement in Krishna consciousness. So that's why it's good to, I guess, know these things. So I guess those are some thoughts about the nature of women. We'll probably learn more.
Very cool. This is kind of a tough topic, so I want to just appreciate the fact that you made a very nice effort to kind of explain it. One thing I was, Jajjanappa and I were talking about this issue, and I was reading this essay that particularly addresses how the Shastra depicts women. And I think this is an important point for consideration, because it actually specifically analyzes this pastime of Kashyapa and Diti. And one of the points that this author makes in the essay is that we have to see that the statements about women are usually in a certain context. And if you take them out of their context, they seem very unusual or unfair. But studied within the context, they seem very reasonable. So particularly in Kashyapa's case, the author points out that he's a learned sage who was supposed to know the nature of women, and he fell for it. So he's actually, these verses that he quotes about the nature of women is actually a way for him to deflect the blame. So instead of admitting that, although I'm a man of knowledge who should have been aware that something like this could happen, I still fell for it, he starts to kind of find fault with women as a class, which is also our tendency in the material world. When we, fall victim to something, instead of admitting, I made a mistake, I should have known, we start to blame the environment. You know what I'm saying? This is like a common.
Who wrote this essay?
We can talk about it after class.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway,
So,
I don't know.
Feel free to comment on this. Feel free
Sure.
to comment on this point. We can talk about it after class. I would prefer. Thank you. That was one thing. The 2 more things I wanted to point out. Feel free to. Well, I don't know if we have to know who wrote the essay to understand the point. The point is a point. We can address the point intellectually as a point without.
Sure, because intellectually, I mean, I'm seeing that Kashyapa Muni, he took the responsibility. He was supposed to understand Kashyapa's, or the nature of women, but he didn't in this particular case. But then when he became sober from having, gotten this crazy request from his wife, then he took the blame. Like later in the past.
But at the same time, he blames women as a class.
No, he doesn't. He just points out their nature. He said they have adopted a means of following her nature. So, and then he's not
If
saying.
you go to verse 41 and 42, that's where it becomes even more, like you could say, pointed in terms of how they're like this and they're like that. So in this particular pastime, the author's interpretation is he's saying these things to kind of deflect the blame.
He might say these things, but he's not blaming women. That's what I understand.
It's one consideration. 2 more points I wanted to bring up. One was this point about women being able to appreciate the pastimes more because they have an emotional nature. Seems to me a bit of a material imposition, because when you read Bhakti Rasamrita, you read Nectar of Devotion, the qualification to enter into the pastimes of Krishna is an attraction for the holy name, is an attraction for a particular type of service. It's a certain, you could say, upliftment in consciousness by absorption in hearing and chanting. So it seems to me a bit of a material imposition to just say that, that's kind of like saying because somebody is a really good dancer, then they will probably be more qualified to enter the rasa dance. That's what it seemed like to me. So please comment on that also. And the third point I wanted to bring up was, it seems to me very interesting, this quote by Srila Prabhupada.
I'll just comment on that first before I forget. I remember I heard from it was Sachinanda Maharaj or something like that we should be chanting with feeling. No, Prabhupada Maharaj, he also says this. He said, yeah, something. So he was saying that we should chant with feeling, and then, oftentimes people, especially men, they have this block. They're like, well, I don't have any feelings. How can I chant with feeling? And then Maharaj is saying, well, chant with that feeling, the feeling that I have no feeling. Or just chant with, and then I remember one lecture I was hearing from Giriraj Maharaj, he's like, just chant with feeling, even if it is like material, whatever, just emotion, just some feeling in it, the chanting, and then eventually through just chanting with feeling, that will turn into something spiritual, although in the beginning it might be material. We even hear the pastime of Ajamil, how he chanted with feeling, calling out the name of his son. It was material in that sense, but it gave him so much spiritual upliftment from having chanted with feeling. That was one of the main things in that whole pastime. So if we're hearing Krishna's pastimes with feeling, even though they might be material in the beginning, that's still helpful and beneficial for being able to develop love for Krishna. That's my understanding from hearing these different speakers.
In that Ajamil pastime you pointed out, the main reason why he got what he got is because he chanted without offenses, not because he chanted with feeling. That is a point, but the main reason why he got another shot, or why his chanting had any benefit at all, is because he was chanting without offenses. He wasn't chanting to counteract his sins.
Yeah, that's true, but it's also, the feelings were there. If you read some of the purports,
The feelings for his son.
Prabhupada does point out that he was chanting with feeling, and that's, anyway, that point doesn't negate the point that that having some emotions is not.
Yeah, I had a third
One Mataji who was saying, oh, because women have feelings, they're more likely to go back to God. Whatever the phraseology used, I took that more as a tongue-in-cheek and not necessarily like a philosophical. That's right. It's more like a tongue-in-cheek thing, like you're saying, because he dances very well. He'll be part of the rasa dance. It was more tongue-in-cheek. I did not accept it as a.
Well, that was the opinion of that one.
Yeah, it was
I
someone's
didn't say
opinion.
that's the way it was. I just said that's what this one senior lady in our movement said.
If there were a philosophical point, I would have an objection or something to say. It was more tongue-in-cheek. How I took it.
It's true, but as he's expanding on it, it seems to be that he's of the, which is fine, that perhaps, like you're pointing these examples from the retreats, that, chant with feeling, even if it's a material feeling, eventually it'll turn into something spiritual. That's the point I'm addressing. You know what I'm saying? Because I've been to those retreats, and my experience of it was that the reason why the senior devotees sometimes say those things is because they want the devotees to have an experience of some sort in the retreat. And Sachinanda Maharaj also explains us that when they go back to their respective home places, they'll recall that emotional experience and think, oh, it came through chanting, so let me chant some more. You see what I'm saying?
So that's also helpful, no?
It's also helpful.
Advancing in spiritual life.
It's also helpful, but I don't necessarily agree with the point that just because somebody has a more emotional nature, that it's in any way more beneficial. Because if somebody is not a very emotional person, but he's making a very sincere effort to just hear the holy name and call out to Krishna in a mood of service, he will also get a better, if not a higher result.
That's emotions, no?
It's a desire, and a desire can evoke in anyone's heart, whether or not you're an emotional person. If you hear the philosophy, you can have that desire. I want to be engaged in Krishna's service. It's as simple as that.
Being an emotional person and having emotions are two different things. Okay? Everyone is supposed to have emotions towards Krishna. Being emotional is a connotation that they are carried by their emotions. That's not what we're talking about. Having emotions is important. We call it the affective side. It's very necessary. Otherwise, the heart is not touched. Right? That's all. How I.
We're not talking about emo people. Emo people are not going to be. Not necessarily. Anyway.
Just the third point, I was wondering if you could address this point that came up from Prabhupada's quote. I thought this was a very interesting point, that for a man, a woman is woman, and for a woman, the man is woman, because a woman identifies an object of enjoyment. When you were giving, I've heard Bhakti Purna Maharaj's opinions on male and female psychology, and what I've also seen is that it seems to go a little deeper than just the external form, because what it's really referring to, when you say man, what it's referring to is a psychological understanding of, in a way of approaching the world that will be different from how a woman approaches it. And that, as you pointed out very nicely from that 16 minutes example, that psychological understanding could even awaken in a woman, quote unquote, a person with a woman's body could have the psychological disposition of a man, you know. So it seems interesting to me. I mean, I'm just wondering what you think about this in terms of like gender studies. It's a big field now. What it seems like we have a valuable contribution to make here. Usually they think we're like backwards and archaic in our approach to the sexes, but it seems like if we really understand this, we have a valuable contribution to make. That you're actually, you guys thinking that a woman is a woman just because she has a female body are at fault, because you haven't understood that there's a psychology that goes with that form.
Right, and that's what psychology is discovering more and more, that it's not so much about as much about the physical and the way that how far the psychology has gotten so far, at least according to my understanding of the 60 Minutes thing that I watched, was that it's not so much about the physical, you know, what the anatomy of the body, but their limit is that it's actually more about the brain, you know, because that's pretty much what the extent to what they can study. So they say it's more, as far as what gender you are, it really matters more what's between the ears as opposed to what's between the legs. That's what they said. But it's we do have a valuable thing to contribute here. I remember Donna Keeley, she said that when she first heard that Bhaktivedanta Purna Maharaj lecture, she's been in Krishna consciousness since 1980 something, the 80s, till basically just 2010. So for 30 years she was practicing Krishna consciousness, something, who knows. It's a long amount of time she was practicing Krishna consciousness, and she herself was never fully convinced about this point about women being less intelligent than men. She said, I've never heard a convincing argument. Donna Keeley said this. And she said, I've never heard a convincing argument about why women are less intelligent than men. I mean, she was able to like say it enough to like pacify people, but like maybe internally she wasn't like really fully understanding or feeling it like this was like the way it was, because she's saying, I know so many more women who are way more intelligent than men. And she might not have been thinking like that, but she said that she didn't say maybe that last thing, but she did say other things. But she said when she heard this lecture by Bhaktivedanta Purna Maharaj, she said it clarified so many things for her to be able to understand this, I guess, statement. So I would agree with you that we do have something valuable to contribute in this larger discussion in society.
Two things. One is we have more to contribute is because, let's say, modern or most considerations do not see the continuity of the soul from one species or from one body to another. So previous karmas affect this life's psychology and body. So that's a big consideration that perhaps no one takes into account. And the other point of, I know many other women or men who are more or less intelligent, is itself a weak argument for any of us, because we don't know all men and we don't know all women. We only have our experience. And third piece is, most people take those statements very personally. Are you talking about my mama? Are you calling my mother less intelligent now? Come on. Then there's the bias that falls in, the personal bias that clouds everything else. And the fourth thing is, we're talking about species, not a person in particular. For example, if we were to say a tiger is very ferocious, a baby tiger should not have an objection. What, you calling my mother ferocious now? She is ferocious. A snake is envious. Whatever. A pig is dirty. Similarly, a man is like this, a woman. The body comes with these qualities. You have to look at the soul within that body, which we're trying to, each one of us trying to extricate ourselves from that particular combination of matter. So when we start taking it personally, then that's the identification, that's the issue here. Oh, he's calling women less intelligent. He's calling me less intelligent. It's not you as a woman or him as a man, oh, he's better. But the soul's nothing to do with these things.
But some people, they do have like
Sure.
issues with women, with the argument that women's nature is less intelligent than men's nature, just philosophically.
Yeah, the only thing is we don't know all women and we don't know all men, and what they're just like the way they say 8,400,000 species. The scientist was like, oh, come on, where have you seen that? So it's one of those things. We don't have the whole perspective. Now within the perspective, then there are very nicely the way you analyzed a few things. This is really, it brings a person to a place where they can, at least there's a little crack in the door that says, oh, okay, there may be another view here. To solve it is not easy. Someone else at the end.
Thank you, Guruji. I just want to consider some points also about, we're talking about less, more intelligent. So then, well, what is intelligence? And I've particularly remember some nice conversations about Jai Jagannath in Bhagavad Gita, where emotional content in the conditioned state generally can pose more as an obstacle, because in the conditioned state, the false ego, the function of the material mind is thinking, feeling, and willing. So in the case of Arjuna, he's becoming emotional. He's letting his emotions cloud his judgment. So you can see in the material sense that the emotions that come are generally perhaps limiting. Therefore, Krishna describes buddhi yoga. When our mind and our intelligence are materially absorbed, or our mind is materially absorbed, they only really help us to gain light from the intelligence. And that intelligence, that buddhi yoga, is then directing us when the mind and intelligence become more purified. For example, you mentioned spiritual emotions. That's on a deeper level. That's actually coming more from the soul. And then in the case of, so intelligence could be considered, if it's described that women are, 9 times less, you can see the intelligence is more geared materially towards making a comfortable situation like that. Whereas if the man is not depending on the emotional side more, the intelligence could be employed more in seeing things more objectively, in the fact that, making a nice situation material isn't very logical, if it's properly engaged like that. So I was just seeing how, kind of how we define intelligence makes a big distinction. And the overall message that I understand from the Vedas is that the male form of life is more suitable. It's actually specifically meant for self-realization. So there's certainly advantages, disadvantages of both, but on the whole, the Bhagavatam is more or less describing that the position of a male birth may be more favorable.
Yeah, Bhaktivedanta Maharaj, he defines intelligence, kind of considering whatever the Vedas say about it, as 3 things: memory, ability to, be able to memorize things, knowledge, how much knowledge you have, and the power to discriminate. So these are the 3, and then particularly the power to discriminate is the most important aspect of intelligence, particularly the ability to discriminate between matter from spirit. That's, I guess, the definition of intelligence. I guess in that sense of the word intelligence, then again, men generally, their intelligence has a better ability to discriminate between matter and spirit, because women have a tendency to kind of enjoy material nature more, and therefore they can't as well as men in general be able to discriminate between what is matter and what is spirit. I was thinking of what you said about bringing up the example of Arjuna getting on the emotional platform. Now, when Arjuna was on the emotional platform, one sense he could say that, he was, it wasn't like necessarily directed toward Krishna directly. He was thinking about his family and kinsmen and all these other quote-unquote material things, and that's why he was on the emotional platform. when I was referring to the point about women having an advantage because they're more emotional, therefore, when they hear pastimes of Krishna, or anybody who has more emotions and feelings, they can their emotions is directed towards Krishna, whether they're material or not. They're like, oh, I can fall in love with Krishna. It might be sentimental, but at least it's beneficial than versus just hearing about Krishna and mechanically hearing and not getting anything out of it. At least there's some feeling there. Whereas Arjuna's emotional thing is a little different. It's not necessarily directed toward Krishna specifically.
I would agree with that. I would say that's one. Looking at advantages and disadvantages, that's one advantage of the women. Prabhupada does say that Krishna's pastimes are so attractive that tender-hearted women can easily become attracted. Therefore, of course, that would necessitate detachment from matter to a significant degree to really get the benefit of that attraction. If we're talking about the intelligence, so simultaneously there has to be that intelligence of, because if the mind is still absorbed in sense gratification, then that benefit of that attraction may not fully mature. But it's a nice.
Yeah, but it's helpful. It's an advantage. That's the only point. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Jai Baladev, then Jitendra, and then.
All right, I'll try to keep this short as possible. Ironically, I'll try to be the shortest one. So I was thank you for a nice class. First of all, I just want to share some points I appreciated from different sources, starting with Ramapal Maharaj, because basically we understand from the Gita that it's basically impossible to control the senses. So I asked him a question when he was here with Lakshmi Moni Matsuji. The question I asked him, he made a confirmation basically that there's a direct connection between controlling our senses and not only avoiding Vaishnava Aparad, but also always carrying the glories of devotees, within our hearts. And so this brings to mind the story of Sobari Muni. He was, meditating in water for 10,000 years, no women involved, but he offended Garuda, and what? 2 fish turned him on. Embarrassing situation. And so it all depends on our gratitude, our mentality. So this reminds me of one thing Christian preacher I came across. He made an excellent point. He says we may be at the right place at the right time with the wrong mentality. And so this reminded me of what Nityananda Prabhupada said a few days ago, familiarity breeds contempt. We may have everything perfect in the temple, but we're like, oh, it's the same old service, same old deity, same old prasadam, same old devotees. So I noticed that when our gratitude goes down, our respect for devotees goes down, and then the material world starts seeming more attractive, then our senses become even more uncontrolled. And so by contrast, King Chitraketu, he was at the wrong place at the wrong time with the right mentality, and therefore Lord Shiva glorified him as Narayana Padasarve. And so even though this verse is popular, one that I mentioned a few months ago, one of my favorite verses in the Uddhava Gita, is in chapter 8. It says, Akinchanasya dantaisa shantaisa samachetasa maya santushta manasa sarvasuka mayadishaha. It says, one who does not desire anything within this world, like honor, who has attained peace by controlling his senses, who is equal in all conditions of life, swarga pravarga nadakeshu, and finds satisfaction in only me, Krishna says, then he finds only happiness wherever he goes. And so in Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's purport, he says, it's a perfect purport, it makes everything clear. He says that when a wealthy man travels all over the world, he will enjoy the same standard of comfort. Similarly, one who's experiencing a wealth of Krishna consciousness finds only happiness wherever he goes because Krishna is all pervading. So the lesson I took from that is that, whether somebody disrespects us out of envy or disrespects us because we deserve to be disrespected because we're proud or envious ourselves, the mentality is always the same, of gratitude. Oh, thank you, Krishna, for giving me the opportunity to be more humble, more tolerant, and more forgiving, regardless of whether somebody criticizes you because you're a woman or you're black. You did this stuff in your previous life, so get over it. Let it go. So I'm not sure if you have any comments on that, but those was 2 points I wanted to appreciate.
Yeah, whatever our situation is, there's no one else to blame but ourselves for whatever our current condition is. That's what Kashyapa Muni is saying. I have no one else to blame but me for being in this situation of having agreed to kill or come up with a situation that will kill Indra. So I'm only to blame for that, not my wife. So, but anyway, a good point. All right, Tender Blue.
When we say offending one another, and we shouldn't really take it personal, but that it also says that we shouldn't disturb sentient beings, and we do have a first offense. Do not blaspheme the devotees of the Lord. So, a devotee is said when there's offense not to take offense, but we're not supposed to offend one another. Another thing is that everyone acts in the material world according to their nature, and then it says, what good does repression accomplish? And the whole material world is an identity crisis because of our gross and subtle bodies. Now, as far as Donna Kaylee goes, I mean, she might have told me or told Preetu, but she says, I'm a man in a woman's body. So, because I could see the way she was behaving sometimes, and which, everybody acts according to their nature, and then we were talking about intelligence, and Prabhupada gives the example. He says, you're on a roof, and you're close to the edge, and the mind says jump, and the intelligence says don't. Yeah. So we can look at it that way. Let's see here, and then it says bhakti, devotion to Krishna destroys our subtle body, and then we come to our real body, which is our real identity. So these upadhis are destroyed by devotion. We don't see things as they are, but as we are. And then he also says that Kali Yuga is surcharged with ignorance. So everything's a form of perplexity. At every stop. Like even Prabhupada, when he was in New York, he says, I didn't know which way to turn. So. And then another thing is, I remember in Vietnam, they people, soldiers, they were drafted and they were given guns and they're out in the field, but they had no real, Kshatriya spirit. They were just, a lot of them were just like farm boys from, some rural part of America, and so everything is topsy-turvy in Kali Yuga. It's an ocean of faults. And then, as far as gross and subtle bodies, I remember Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he wouldn't look in the mirror. He would just to put his tilak on, because he didn't want to be...
I thought it was Bhaktisiddhanta. It could have been.
Well, he probably, like father, like son, But, I thought that was kind of interesting, because if you look at him in some pictures and stuff, he's like, completely out of his material body. It's just like, I mean, I didn't see his halo or anything, but so anyways, another thing is, there was a thing in Cleveland, I think it was what was that black sannyasi who just passed away not too long ago, Bhaktitirtha. He was writing a letter to Srila Prabhupada. He said that, I felt that there's a lot of duality here in Cleveland, and I remember they had a black temple and a white temple, and Prabhupada chastised them for them criticizing him, and for him accepting that identity which they were laying upon him. I don't know if you remember that last time. Yeah. But anyways, a few things came to mind. Thank you, Hare Krishna.
Bhakti Maharaj just said that. For Prabhupada said that if they criticize you, that's their fault. If you, something like, if you become offended, then that's your fault. Something like that. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much. Prabhupada ki.